This is The Listening Tube.
Hello, welcome to The Listening Tube. I'm your host, Bob Woodley. On this edition, we'll hear about the reaction to the purchase of Twitter and why none of it may matter, why you can run but you can't hide, and why we know exactly where we are. But first,
Not the headlines.
what would have been the largest open-pit mine in the rainforest of Brazil has been denied a license by the federal court. Brazil has what's called the National Indian Foundation, and according to a story by Fabiano Maisonev for the AP, the court ruled that the project didn't meet the required criteria to be approved. The ruling was the result of an appeal by the Canadian company heading the project. The same court denied the project in 2017. The company can still appeal to a higher court, but it hasn't yet said if it would do so. This project has been years in the making and requires a multi-million-dollar investment just to get started. Estimates are that the mine would produce 3,780,000 ounces of gold. Let's try to put that into perspective. That much gold would be worth almost $7.2 billion this week. How big of a mine are we talking here? Well, it's a strip mine, so not only will it take up the part of the earth that is dug up, but also areas around it for support buildings and roads and other infrastructure. A 2017 article in Mining Technology says the mine is planned to be in two parts. One extends for 1,100 meters to a vertical depth of 540 meters, and the other extends for 2,900 meters and has a vertical depth of 400 meters. For us Americans, that's 30 football fields wide and 4 football fields deep. And that doesn't include the other one, which isn't as big around, but is an additional football field deep. That's a very large area, to be sure, and would certainly do damage to the current environment there. Plus, the plan calls for all of the extraction of the gold from the rock on site, which would include processes like crushing, grinding, gravity recovery with intensive leach, cyanidation of slurry and carbon, electrowinning, carbon regeneration, and cyanide detoxification. The use of cyanide has a history of leaving death and destruction in its wake at former gold mines elsewhere. The area where the gold is believed to be is along a north-flowing river, a tributary of the Amazon, that now hosts the world's third-largest hydroelectric dam. The dam itself is what made the land accessible, but it also led to the destruction of local tribes' lifestyles and fishing habitats. The mining company says its operations will be 6 miles from the nearest village, so it won't have any effect on populated areas. The project itself, according to the company, will cover almost 6,000 acres of land. So how much gold are we getting from this effort that will take years to complete, hundreds of millions to invest, acres of land to be laid bare and abandoned afterward, human lives disrupted and lifestyles extinguished? Let's do the math. 1 pound of gold is 23.5 cubic centimeters. So, if we convert 3.78 million ounces to pounds, we get 236,250 pounds of gold. If we multiply that by 23.5, we get 5,551,875 cubic centimeters, or 5.55 cubic meters of gold. How big is that in English? That's about 196 cubic feet of gold. If my math is correct, that's a cube about 5.8 feet high, wide, and deep. That $7 billion worth of gold could fit inside your living room. You could sit your beer on it. if the weight of it didn't make the floor collapse. 6,000 acres of land will be disrupted for it. Look, gold is an important element. It's valued for many properties, including its luster, its resistance to corrosion, its malleability, its conductivity. Gold is an intrinsic part of our lives, and its value was recognized thousands of years ago. Today, we wear it as a symbol of wealth, as did kings and pharaohs. Like water and coal, though, there's only so much gold to go around. Unlike water, we don't need it to survive, but like coal, its extraction from the earth leaves a scar. Our demand for gold can be justified in many ways, but does our desire to adorn ourselves with it justify the destruction of rainforests and cultures? How much should we be willing to sacrifice for a block of gold? If gold is so rare and valuable, should we restrict its uses? We need gold for a lot more important things than hanging it around our necks and plating toilet seats for Vladimir Putin and his cronies. Before your next trip to the jewelry store, ask yourself if gold is really the way you want to decorate yourself. Like blood diamonds, the gold you buy could be just as deadly.
Well, that can't be right.
The Attorney General of the state of Indiana has announced he's filing a lawsuit against the global parent of Black Lives Matter. Nearly 2 months ago, the Indiana Attorney General launched an investigation into how BLM was using donations from the good people of Indiana. As part of the investigation, the AG requested information and documents from the group. Black Lives Matter never responded to the request, so the AG is asking a Marion County judge to force compliance. In a news release announcing the lawsuit, the AG says BLM published a report in 2020 that said it had raised more than $90 million, and that $21 million of those dollars went to local chapters, including one in South Bend. Yet the AG's office says an IRS filing from the organization for the first half of 2020 showed no revenue, expenses, or assets. In any case, the news release says that Indiana law dictates that if Black Lives Matter doesn't comply with the request, it could result in sanctions against them, including barring them from raising money in Indiana. I went to the Black Lives Matter global website. I couldn't find a way to donate to the organization except to buy t-shirts and other swag. Under the About section, it talks about the organization's mission and says it is to, quote, eradicate white supremacy and build local power to intervene in violence inflicted on black communities by the state and vigilantes, unquote. I must say I was surprised to see such a narrow scope. If the organization truly believes that Black Lives Matter, why do they not include in their vision to also stop black people from committing violence against black people? Statistics show that would go much further in helping the black population in America than anything else they could do. A recent article by the Media Research Center looked at crime statistics from 2018, the most recent in which race was used as part of the breakdowns of the statistics. It showed that just over 70% of violent crimes against black people were committed by black people. 10.6% of violent crimes against black people were committed by white people. The statistics also show that all races of people are more likely to be victims of violent crime by people of their own race, except Asians. Asian people are most often victims of violent crimes by black people. If Black Lives Matter really cared about black lives, they would address the problems within the community as well as those without.
Let's go back through the listening tube.
This week in 1776, Rhode Island becomes the first American colony to renounce allegiance to King George III. That's right, the smallest American colony was the only one with the guts to stand up to the British monarchy. Then, 13 years later, in 1789, on the balcony of Federal Hall on Wall Street in New York City, George Washington takes the oath of office to become the first elected president of the United States. This week in 1861, during the Civil War, Richmond, Virginia is declared the new capital of the Confederate States of America. It had been Montgomery, Alabama, but was moved to Richmond for the manufacturing facilities and railroad hubs. It's still a popular place for Confederate hangers-on and others who pine for antebellum. This week in 1884, a proclamation of the demand for an 8-hour workday was made in the United States, and 2 years later, this week in 1886, rallies are held throughout the United States demanding the 8-hour workday, culminating in the Haymarket Affair. The Haymarket Affair happened in Chicago. It began as a peaceful protest to working conditions that ended in the deaths of 7 police officers and several civilians when a dynamite bomb was thrown at police who were trying to break up the protest. 4 men were hanged as a result. This week in 1900, Casey Jones dies in a train wreck in Vaughan, Mississippi, while trying to make up time on the Cannonball Express. I only mention this because a lot of Grateful Dead fans have heard the name but don't know the story behind it. In 1905, the trial in the Stretton Brothers case begins in London, England. It marks the first time that fingerprint evidence is used to gain a conviction for murder. And this week in 1925, in the Scopes trial, serving of an arrest warrant for John T. Scopes for teaching evolution in violation of the Butler Act. That's right, it was illegal to teach anything other than the Bible's account of mankind's origin in Tennessee. This week in 1943, during World War II, it was Operation Mincemeat. The submarine HMS Seraph surfaces in the Mediterranean Sea off the coast of Spain to deposit a dead man planted with false invasion plans and dressed as a British military intelligence officer. The operation was based on a memo written by Rear Admiral John Godfrey and his personal assistant, Lieutenant Commander Ian Fleming. If the name Ian Fleming rings a bell, it's probably because he invented the British spy character James Bond. The plan worked, as Spanish fishermen found the body and turned over the documents planted on the body to the Nazis. This week in 1948, the U.S. Supreme Court rules in Shelley versus Kramer that covenants prohibiting the sale of real estate to blacks and other minorities are legally unenforceable. There is still discrimination against black people when it comes to housing, but clearly steps were being taken as far back as 1948 to address the problem. This week in 1961, the Prime Minister of Cuba, Fidel Castro, proclaims Cuba a socialist nation and abolishes elections. I think it's funny that countries like Russia and China still have elections. They probably have to pay people to not vote for the dictator just to make the election seem fair, but just enough to create the illusion that you made the right choice by voting for the dictator. This week in 1963, the Bristol bus boycott is held in Bristol to protest the Bristol Omnibus Company's refusal to employ black or Asian bus crews, drawing national attention to racial discrimination. Even though 15 years earlier, the Supreme Court decided you can't make rules that prohibit selling real estate to minorities, but the U.S. Supreme Court decision didn't have any effect on the Bristol Omnibus Company for 2 reasons. 1, the decision was about real estate, not bus crews, and 2, it happened in the United Kingdom, not the United States. This week in 1970, protests erupt in Seattle, Washington, following the announcement by U.S. President Richard Nixon that U.S. forces in Vietnam would pursue enemy troops into Cambodia, a neutral country. And also this week in 1970, the Kent State shootings took place. The Ohio National Guard, sent to Kent State University after disturbances in the city of Kent the weekend before, opens fire, killing 4 unarmed students and wounding 9 others. The students were protesting the United States invasion of Cambodia. The enemy troops retreated into Cambodia, and U.S. troops followed them to prevent them from regrouping across an international border. This was a real issue of the time, and nationwide protests erupted. Today, the United States military will hunt down terrorists to wherever they are in the world. We killed Osama bin Laden in Pakistan, while the president of Pakistan claimed bin Laden wasn't in his country. We took out ISIS leaders and an Iranian general with drones and other special operations. As the Cambodia invasion demonstrated, if you think you're safe from the U.S. military because of a boundary line, you're sadly mistaken. 5 years later, this week in 1975, the U.S. begins to evacuate U.S. citizens from Saigon prior to an expected North Vietnamese takeover. U.S. involvement in the war comes to an end. This week in 1978, the first unsolicited bulk commercial email, which later would become known as spam, is sent by a Digital Equipment Corporation marketing representative to every ARPANET address on the west coast of the United States. I wonder, is there a server somewhere with one of those emails from 1978 that's still unopened? This week in 1952, Lieutenant Colonels Joseph O. Fletcher and William P. Benedict of the United States land a plane at the North Pole. And this week in 1978, Japan's Naomi Uemura said, "Hold my beer." Traveling by dog sled, he is the first person to reach the North Pole alone. I wonder how long it took. I'm going to look that up.
He's going to look it up. He's really going to do it.
I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
This guy was amazing. Naomi Uemura reached the North Pole by dog sled with only his dogs to keep him from dying out there. It took 57 days, and, according to his Wikipedia page, he is also the first to climb Mount McKinley, now known as Denali, alone. He was also the first person to take a dog sled team the entire length of the Greenlandic ice sheet. His modus operandi is that he does what he does all by himself, or with his sled dogs. He's been missing since 1984, lost while on his way back down Denali after his second ascent. This week in 1988, the PepCon disaster rocks Henderson, Nevada, as tons of space shuttle fuel detonate during a fire. Today, Henderson is a nice place to live. It was later one of America's fastest-growing cities. Now, I know I'm on an audio platform, and I could try to describe to you the magnitude of the explosion, but even the most skilled wordsmith would have trouble describing the way the initial explosion seemed so intense that when it was over, there was a sort of sigh of relief, although there was still a lot of potential for more. Then, the massive explosion that followed was what can only be described as awesome, in the sense that awestruck is what you were reduced to when you realized what you just witnessed. Really. Watch the video. In 1993, CERN announces World Wide Web protocols will be free. And in 2000, President Bill Clinton announces that accurate GPS access would no longer be restricted to the United States military. Now, GPS is built right into our cars and our phones, leading us to wherever we want to go and telling us exactly where we are. It also tells telemarketers where we are so that our phone can tell us that we're only 3.2 miles from a great bargain. This week in 2000, Vladimir Putin was inaugurated president of Russia. He actually took control the last day of 1999. And in 2001, the United States loses its seat on the UN Human Rights Commission for the first time since the commission was formed in 1947. Eleanor Roosevelt was the chairwoman back then. Why it happened is up to debate. Some say it was because many of our European allies wanted to punish us for different reasons. Others say it's because the U.S. is bunched into the European group and there are too many candidates for the seats. The U.S. is on the Council, and the current term expires in 2024, according to the United Nations Human Rights Council website. And in 2003, New Hampshire's famous Old Man of the Mountain collapses. The U.S. Mint was issuing $quarter that featured all 50 states, 5 states a year, and New Hampshire's had recently come out featuring the very mountain that collapsed, almost as if it had been waiting to be memorialized before he was willing to let go. This week in 2006, the Puerto Rican government closes the Department of Education and 42 other government agencies due to significant shortages in cash flow. Maybe our federal government should take a look at what agencies we could do away with. Why do we need a Department of Education if school districts are local and the state controls public education? Undoing any federal government agency is a real uphill battle because of the high number of employees the government has. You can't get Congress to act because everybody knows the unions won't have any of it. And this week in 2011, Osama bin Laden, the suspected mastermind behind the September 11 attacks and the FBI's most wanted man, is killed by United States Special Forces in Abbottabad, Pakistan. We were just talking about that, weren't we? You can run, but you can't hide.
Contact the Listening Tube by calling 570-601-1101 or by email thelisteningtube@outlook.com.
Well, I'm sure I don't have to tell you about the guy who bought Twitter. We talked about it 2 episodes ago, and since then, he pulled the trigger after lining up the financing. I don't know anything about Twitter from personal experience, but I'm familiar with some of it. The character limit and how Donald Trump isn't allowed on anymore. But since the deal, the media's been all abuzz about it, and there seem to be 2 very different sides to the issue. The right wing seems happy that the platform will be in different hands. Donald Trump has already said he won't play along even if they let him back on, opting to stay with another service. Many on the right see Elon Musk's purchase of the platform as a victory for free speech, as Mr. Musk has declared himself a free speech absolutionist. Meanwhile, those on the left are up in arms, declaring that Twitter will become a megaphone for white men, with one liberal talking head going so far as to say Elon Musk wants to go back to the days of South African apartheid. The left warns of letting the rich buy themselves the means to control the narrative, while Jeff Bezos owns the liberal Washington Post. Why was there no outrage when that purchase was made? Let's briefly compare the 2. As recently as I could find numbers for, the Washington Post has a current circulation estimated around 2 million, but Mr. Bezos hasn't released any numbers that I could find. Plus, they printed as many as 356,000 papers a day as recently as 2015, but those numbers have probably fallen considerably since then. Twitter, on the other hand, has 73 million users in the United States, of which 37 million are daily active users. So clearly, Twitter has a much larger influence than the Washington Post. Or does it? An article by Brian Dean cites a BrandWatch list of the most followed Twitter users. The list is quite revealing. It exposes for all to see who in America has the most influence over the people. The right argues that Twitter is too liberal and needs more free speech. The left is afraid this tool of the party will be lost to white conservatives, which for some reason isn't considered a racist thing to say. So who's the most followed person on Twitter? Barack Obama, with 129.9 million followers. Aha, says the right, we told you. But then right after Barack Obama, the list takes a turn to which the Doppler effect would have trouble adjusting. Here it is, in order of descending followers. After Barack Obama, Justin Bieber, Katy Perry, Rihanna, Cristiano Ronaldo, Taylor Swift, Ariana Grande, Lady Gaga, and Ellen DeGeneres. So far, not exactly political leaders by any stretch of the imagination. Then YouTube, with 73.1 million followers, followed by the next most popular politician, Narendra Modi. He's the right-wing Prime Minister of India. After him, we have three more celebrities, Kim Kardashian, who worked with President Trump on criminal justice issues, then Selena Gomez, and Justin Timberlake. Then comes the first news source, CNN Breaking News, with 61.2 million followers. Here's where it gets interesting. The next two on the list, Twitter, with 59.5 million followers, the beast feeding itself. While Twitter compiles everything people say, they decide which voices are amplified to almost 60 million people. But then right after Twitter itself, the next most followed is the new boss. Only 200,000 followers behind. Rounding out the top after Elon Musk comes Britney Spears, Bill Gates, and Demi Lovato. That's an interesting list indeed. Other than Obama and Modi, there are no politicians. One could argue that most celebs are liberal, but there's a good chance the top followers of the Washington Post have more political influence than the top followed on Twitter. But certainly, the purchase of Twitter by Elon Musk isn't insignificant. For now, all standard operating procedures at Twitter have been locked in to prevent a rogue employee from doing anything drastic. A measure warranted by the sheer disgust displayed by some of them at the thought of Twitter becoming what Elon Musk envisions. From what he's said so far, the only change he wants to make that might change how Twitter looks is an open-sourced algorithm, so people know why they're seeing what they're seeing. That doesn't seem like a bad thing. So on the surface, I don't see there being much difference. But then why is the legacy media so upset? Why are they claiming this is such a bad thing? Are they trying to get ahead of the story so that if Twitter does go to pot, they'll be able to say, "We told you so"? Why do the legacy media already have such a negative opinion of something that hasn't happened yet? Why do they anticipate the worst, and why don't they, like actual journalists, wait to see what happens and then report on it? I guess it's okay to try to analyze the sale and see if the tea leaves can tell us anything, but to already have formed an opinion that predicts doom and gloom over a phone app that lets you tell the world how you feel about something is a bit of a stretch. Since I'm not on Twitter, I have to look at it from the outside, and I'm perfectly fine with that. I'm not sure I want to jump into that cesspool. If Twitter turns into something it currently isn't, which I'm guessing will be something more conservative than it is now, then that might actually level the playing field a bit, because as far as I can tell, the liberal side already has most of the media and big tech behind it. But here's something to take into consideration. Everyone has the ability to use the World Wide Web to express themselves. I create this program and make it available for anyone in the world. You can too. The age of the rich and powerful having full control over the thoughts and minds of the masses only exists if we let it. Each of us has the same power to express our opinions and make them available to anyone who wants to listen. Each of us has the tools to create a forum that explores any subject on the planet and beyond. In today's world, it's less of a question of who controls the media than who contributes to the conversation. Today, we're able to contribute, and most of us find the variety of viewpoints attractive and inspirational. Others don't. I find it a bit ironic that the same week Elon Musk buys Twitter, the U.S. federal government announces the creation of a new branch of the Department of Homeland Security called the Disinformation Governance Board. We'll look into that on the next edition of The Listening Tube.
Every little swallow, every chickadee, every little bird in the tall tree. The wise or loud, the big black crow, flap for their wings, sing and go very slow. Rock and roll, rock and roll.
The Listening Tube is written and produced by yours truly. Copyright 2022. Thank you for being a part of The Listening Tube. I'm your host, Bob Woodley, for Thou ad infinitum.
A pretty little raven that the birdman said, talking like a piece of company to one friend. He started going steady and bless my soul. He outfought the buzzard and the oriole. He rocks in the treetop all the day long, hopping and a singing his song. All the little birds on Jaybird Street love to hear the robin go tweet, tweet. Rock and roll, tweet, tweet. Rock and roll, slow rock and roll, because it's really gonna rock tonight. We'll slow rock and roll, because it's really gonna rock tonight.